never thought a birthday candle would mark the moment my own family stripped me of my dignity. One second my daughter-in-law was smiling. The next, she drove a cake into my face so hard I hit the floor, and everyone laughed like it was entertainment. But the real shock didn't come from them. It came later, in the ER, when the doctor studied my X-ray, stepped back, and quietly called 911. It's strange how a single fracture can expose everything a family hides. Tell me, has life ever forced you to look at someone you love and finally see the truth? I turned 68 on a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind of day Atlanta usually saves for family gatherings and easy laughter. My son insisted on hosting a small party at his house, said it would be good for me to be around people again. I wanted to believe him. Ever since my wife passed, I tried to show up whenever he asked, hoping the distance between us might shrink if I kept trying. So I dressed carefully, pressed my shirt, polished my shoes the way my father once taught me, and brought a bottle of wine I knew he liked. The house buzzed with chatter when I arrived. Folks I barely recognized greeted me, offered polite smiles, and drifted off to their conversations. I shook a few hands, nodded at a couple of neighbors, then spotted my daughter-in-law near the kitchen island. Vanessa looked me over like she was checking an item on a list. "Glad you made it," she said, smiling just long enough for the guests behind her to see. I murmured something polite. She had already turned away. Small moments like that had become the norm. Nothing sharp enough to confront, but steady enough to leave bruises no one could see. I ignored the familiar pinch inside my chest, told myself I was imagining it. People lose softness as they grow tired. Maybe that was all it was. My son crossed the room, clapped my shoulder, and asked if I wanted something to drink. I said I was fine. He didn't stay long. He never did these days. Still, hearing his voice warmed something in me that had been cold for years. The crowd shifted as someone dimmed the lights. A few guests cheered. Vanessa walked out holding a cake, white frosting, thick candles, too many for me to count from where I stood. Folks gathered around the dining table, leaving just enough space for me at the head. "Make a wish, Dad," she said brightly. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I leaned in, drawing a slow breath. I wished for something simple. A year with less ache, fewer misunderstandings, maybe one honest moment with my son. Before the breath left my lungs, movement flashed at the edge of my vision. A sharp pressure smashed into my face, forcing frosting up my nose and into my mouth. My head jerked forward, then snapped back as the weight of the cake sent me stumbling. Laughter erupted, loud, full-bodied laughter. Someone clapped. Someone else whistled. I tried to steady myself and wiped frosting from my eyes. My cheek burned. I tasted sugar and something metallic. When I blinked, the room blurred. Not a single voice asked if I was all right. Vanessa held her stomach, laughing so hard she wiped tears from her eyes. "Oh my God, Dad, you should have seen your face," she said. "It was just a joke. Lighten up." Her tone stung worse than the impact. A joke. The kind that leaves you dizzy, humiliated, and standing alone in a room full of people pretending this is normal. My son stepped toward me, chuckling awkwardly. "You're being dramatic," he muttered. "It's just a little cake." Something inside my chest tightened, but I forced myself to nod as if I agreed. I didn't trust my voice. Anger curled somewhere deep, but didn't want to be the old man who ruined his own birthday party. I excused myself quietly and walked to the bathroom. The laughter behind me didn't fade until I closed the door. Frosting clung to my beard. A thin line of blood traced the corner of my mouth. My hands trembled as I turned on the faucet. I splashed water over my face. Bits of cake slid into the sink. I kept rinsing even after my skin felt raw, hoping the hot water might wash away the heat rising in the back of my throat. A knock sounded at the door. "You okay in there?" someone asked, more out of obligation than concern. "Yes," I replied, though the word barely made it past my lips. I looked at my reflection. The man staring back seemed older than I felt. Tired around the eyes, shoulders drawn in as though bracing for another blow. I tried to smile at myself the way I used to, but nothing moved. When I stepped out, the party had already reset itself. Music played again. Someone poured drinks. People leaned into casual conversations as if nothing had happened. Vanessa chatted with a friend, gesturing wildly, her laughter slicing through the room. She didn't even glance in my direction. A heaviness pooled in my stomach. I knew embarrassment. I'd lived long enough to bump into it more than once. But this wasn't that. This was something colder, deliberate. Something that stretched back further than just a ruined birthday. My son caught my eye from across the room. He looked away almost instantly. I moved toward the back door, needing air. The night pressed against me as I stepped outside, a quiet street humming with distant traffic. Porch lights flickered from nearby homes. Somewhere a dog barked. A breeze brushed my skin, taking the scent of frosting with it. For a long moment, I stood alone, hands resting on the railing. Impatience had built inside me for years, settling into places I hadn't noticed, between old memories, old promises, old wounds. Tonight, it shifted, making itself known at last. I thought silence made me strong. I thought swallowing hurt kept the family together. But as I stared into the yard, the truth settled over me with a clarity that startled me. Silence had only made me disappear. I rubbed my jaw where the impact still throbbed and walked back inside, unsure of what I'd say or do next. The door clicked behind me, and the smell of leftover frosting hit me again as the voices drifted toward the kitchen. The morning after the party, I walked out to check the mail, hoping the cool air might settle whatever still churned inside my chest. A couple from down the street passed by with their dog. They waved a little too eagerly. "Rough night, huh?" the husband called out. His wife chuckled. That cake moment was something else. He really played it up. Played it up. The words drifted toward me like dust, irritating enough to make my throat tighten. I forced a polite smile. "Morning," I said, pretending not to understand what they meant. They kept walking, laughing softly, as though they had shared a harmless joke. I stayed on the sidewalk a minute longer, trying to breathe around the knot forming in my stomach. Apparently, the story had already made its way around the neighborhood, trimmed and polished into a version where I wasn't humiliated, just overreacting. Back inside, my phone buzzed. A cousin from Decatur had sent a voice message. "Hey Marcus, heard you got a little dramatic at your own birthday." A laugh followed. "Don't let those kids get to you. They're just having fun." I deleted the message halfway through. My hands shook more than I wanted to admit. The house felt louder than usual, though nothing made noise. Every step echoed. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and tried to replay the night in my mind, slowly, carefully, just to confirm I hadn't imagined the way Vanessa shoved that cake into my face. The burn along my cheek answered for me. Another buzz. A text this time. Heard about the party. Hope you didn't scare the grandkids. I didn't reply. While the pot dripped its last bit of coffee, a knock came at the door. Caroline stood on the porch, wearing one of her Sunday hats, even though it wasn't Sunday. She didn't smile the way she usually did. "Morning," she said softly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She moved through the hallway like someone walking into a home after a funeral. Quiet, respectful, carrying something she didn't know how to say. We sat in the living room. She folded her hands in her lap, glanced toward the window, then back at me. "I saw you step outside last night," she began. "You looked shaken." "I'm fine," I answered too quickly. She studied my face. "Are you?" I tried to nod, but even the gesture felt dishonest. "It was just a joke," I muttered. "People got carried away." Caroline let out a breath through her nose, as if weighing her next words. "One thing my mother used to say," she murmured. "If someone laughs while you bleed, it's not a joke." The sentence landed with a heaviness that made me shift in my chair. I rubbed the edge of my jaw where the ache still lingered. She reached over and touched my forearm gently. "You know how stories travel in this neighborhood," she said. "And right now, the one going around isn't true. It's the one your daughter-in-law is telling." My head lifted a little. "What exactly is she saying?" "That you slipped, that everyone panicked, and that you turned it into something bigger because you can't take a little fun anymore." I stared at the carpet, my nails pressed into my palms. "So people think I fell," I said quietly. "They think you reacted poorly," she corrected. "And if nobody speaks up, that becomes the version everyone stands on." A swallow crawled down my throat. "I don't want drama, Caroline. It was my birthday. I didn't want to embarrass my son." "You didn't," she said immediately. "But she did." Her voice held no hesitation, no wobble, just truth. I shifted again, uncomfortable under the weight of it. "You've been letting things slide for a long time," she added. "Long enough that she's grown comfortable deciding how people view you." "I don't want to cause trouble," I whispered. "That's the thing, Marcus." She leaned back. "The trouble's already here, and you didn't bring it." A silence stretched between us. Not heavy, just honest. From the kitchen, the coffee pot clicked as it cooled. The smell drifted toward us, grounding me for a moment. I could hear kids playing down the street, a car engine turning over, the ordinary rhythm of life carrying on while mine felt slightly off balance. Caroline rose from her seat and walked toward the door. Before stepping out, she looked at me once more. "Be careful with silence," she said. "After a while, it convinces people you agree with whatever they're saying." She let herself out, leaving the faint scent of cedar behind. I stayed on the couch long after she left, elbows on my knees, fingers pressed between my brows. The world felt tilted, but not in a dramatic way, more like a picture frame that no one bothers to straighten, because they figure it's always been that way. My phone buzzed again. Another message I didn't open. I poured myself a cup of the now lukewarm coffee and stood by the back window, watching the neighbour's dog chase a squirrel across the yard. Life moved on easily for everyone else. The ache in my cheek pulsed again. Not sharp, just enough to remind me something had shifted. Not last night, months ago, maybe years, but I hadn't wanted to see it. I rinsed the cup, set it in the dish rack, and wiped the counter more carefully than necessary. My hands needed something to do. At the dining table, a folded napkin still carried a faint smear of frosting from where I'd set it the night before. I picked it up and stared at the mark, unsure why it bothered me so much, then dropped it in the trash. Outside, kids shouted from the sidewalk. A screen door slammed somewhere down the block. The normal rhythms kept going. I stayed by the sink a little longer, letting the water run over my fingers until it warmed. A thought bothered me. Not loud, not urgent, just persistent enough that I couldn't shake it. People weren't repeating my story. They were repeating hers. The faucet hissed as I shut it off. I dried my hands slowly, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of a wall clock, the quiet creak of the house settling around me, while the morning stretched forward, waiting for whatever came next. A few days passed before I saw anyone from church, and when I finally walked into the foyer that Sunday, the first person to approach me was Deacon Harris. He gripped my hand a little too long. His expression caught somewhere between concern and amusement.
"You all right, Brother Marcus?" he asked. "I heard you got upset at your birthday party."
The words struck like a sudden draft sneaking through a cracked window. "Upset?" I repeated. "That's what folks were saying." He lowered his voice. "You know how stories spread. Just checking on you." I nodded, even though my thoughts scrambled. "Appreciate it," I murmured, then moved toward a pew before he could say anything more. During service, I couldn't focus on a single hymn. The choir sang with the same familiar rise and fall, yet my mind drifted back to that one word: upset. Someone had crafted a version of the truth where I was the problem. I tried to picture how the conversation must have travelled, a whisper here, a chuckle there, a shrug that made everything seem harmless. Vanessa must have been the one feeding them. Nobody else knew enough details. I stayed until the benediction, shook a few hands, then left quickly. The sunlight outside felt harsher than usual. As I walked to my truck, a sinking heaviness settled through my chest. Had I looked angry at the party? Had I reacted too strongly? Did I give people the impression that I'd lost control? The more I replayed the scene, the more uncertain I became. My memories blurred between what I felt and what they said I felt. At home, the air inside sat quiet, yet a sense of disorder crept through it. Papers I'd sorted earlier in the week had been moved slightly. My medical bills, which I always stacked near the phone, were no longer in their usual place. After searching a few drawers, I found them tucked behind some envelopes, ones addressed to me but forwarded from my son's house. A prickling discomfort travelled up my spine. I sat at the dining table and spread out the documents. A few listed appointments I never scheduled. One showed an insurance claim I didn't recognise. The handwriting in the notes section wasn't mine. My mouth felt dry as I read through everything again.
Later that afternoon, I received a call from my pharmacy.
Mr. Ellington, we received a request to transfer your prescriptions to a different location. Just confirming, was that you? I gripped the edge of the counter. No, I said. No, it wasn't. We'll hold off then. Just wanted to double check. After the call ended, I set the phone down slowly. A subtle tremor worked its way into my fingers. Someone was rearranging pieces of my life without asking permission. That night, I pulled out a small notepad from the kitchen drawer and began jotting down every strange detail from the past week. The gossip at church, the shifted papers, the prescriptions. Nothing seemed large enough on its own, but together they formed an unsettling pattern. I added another line. Call logs. Check voicemail. A few minutes later, I reviewed the recent calls on my phone. Several automated reminders had been deleted. One voicemail from my doctor's office was cut off halfway through.
I tried to replay it, but the audio glitched repeatedly. I exhaled slowly. Something's off, I whispered to myself. To protect my information, I changed the password on my patient portal and called the office to update my security questions. The receptionist hesitated before confirming that someone had accessed my file the day after the party. Was it you, sir? She asked. No, I answered again, each repetition sounding heavier. After hanging up, I sat at the edge of my bed, feeling like the floor had tilted slightly beneath my feet. A man can handle insults if they're thrown at his face, but the quiet rearranging of his world without his knowledge is something else entirely. It gnaws at the edges of his certainty. I pulled out a small digital recorder I kept from my years supervising construction sites. I started recording any calls dealing with healthcare, insurance, or money. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. Over the next few days, more things shifted around my home. My electric bill went missing and reappeared in the wrong drawer. A medical invoice I'd paid months earlier showed a new balance. My mailbox received 2 letters mentioning changes to account access, though neither explained changes to what. None of these pieces made sense on their own, yet I felt something tightening around me. One afternoon, while organizing receipts, I paused as a memory surfaced, a faint one at first. Vanessa had handled my phone briefly during the party. She said she wanted to take a picture of me with my son, but I never saw that photo afterward. That small detail made my chest feel heavy. I went to my phone settings. Several permissions had been granted to an unfamiliar app. When I tapped on it, the screen went blank before returning to the home page. I tried again. Same result. I rubbed my forehead and stood up. Sitting in the house any longer felt suffocating. A walk around the block brought little relief. Neighbours waved, some a bit too knowingly, like they were in on a joke I wasn't invited to understand. Their smiles tightened something behind my ribs. Back home, I found myself scanning each room, noticing how fragile my routines felt now. The familiar rhythm of my days, coffee at 7, mail at noon, church on Sundays, had carried me through the loneliness after my wife died. Those routines were the anchor I held onto when everything else changed. Now, even those seemed threatened. I gathered a few envelopes, placed them neatly into a shoebox, and tucked the recorder beside it. The small act steadied me for a moment. Then I sat at the table again,
stared at the list I'd made earlier, and added one more line. Pay closer attention. The clock in the hallway ticked steadily, each sound marking another second of a life edging out of my control. I pressed the pen to the paper once more before setting it down, letting the thought linger as the evening stretched ahead. The mailbox felt strangely light that afternoon. I pulled out a handful of advertisements and a church newsletter, but none of the envelopes I expected. No insurance statements, no appointment reminders, nothing with my name printed in the familiar blue ink. A small unease crept into my stomach. I checked the slot again, reached deeper, even shook it slightly as though something might be stuck inside. Nothing. When I stepped back onto the porch, the air around me seemed unusually still. I carried the stack inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and opened my laptop to log into my patient portal. A message flashed across the screen. Your mailing address has been updated. My breath caught. Updated to where? I clicked through the settings. There it was. Vanessa's address listed under my profile. Every medical notice, every billing statement, every piece of sensitive information had been redirected without my knowledge. I grabbed my keys and drove to their house, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling. My hands tightened around the wheel several times during the drive, listening only when I forced myself to breathe slowly. When I reached their driveway, my son wasn't home. Vanessa answered the door with a bright smile that never touched her eyes. Marcus, what brings you here? I need to ask you something, I said. Did you change my mailing address with the clinic? She lifted her eyebrows, pretending surprise. Oh, that. Yes, I did. You mentioned losing some letters last month, so I figured I'd help. My place is closer to the main route. You didn't ask, I replied quietly. She shrugged lightly. I didn't think it mattered. I'm trying to keep things organized for you. Her tone had that practiced softness she used when others were around. But we were alone. Something cold sat beneath her words. Something that had been growing for months, maybe longer. I want it changed back, I said. Of course, she answered, though her smile sharpened. But you know, handling your paperwork takes a lot of time. You might want to let someone else manage it before things get confusing. I didn't respond. That word, confusing, landed like a warning. I thanked her and walked back to the car without looking over my shoulder. Once I reached home, I reset the address myself online. Afterward, I opened the cabinet where I kept my important documents, tax records, bank statements, my will. The folder labelled Financial sat slightly out of place. I sifted through it. One document was missing, a letter from my pension office confirming a recent update to my account. I had placed it there 2 weeks earlier. It wasn't the type of paper that drifted away by accident. I checked the lower drawer, the envelope stack near the phone, even the shelf in the hall closet where I sometimes misplaced things. Nothing. A heaviness settled in my shoulders. Losing a paper wasn't unusual. Losing the one that verified my retirement income was something else entirely. I sat at the dining table, spreading out the remaining documents. My fingers moved through the stack again, slower this time, as though the paper might reveal a clue through touch alone. The pension letter wasn't the only thing gone. An older statement summarizing all my contributions through the years was missing too. I leaned back and let the air out of my lungs in a long, steady breath. The first time something disappeared, I dismissed it. The second time, I wondered if my memory was slipping. But now it felt deliberate. Later that evening, I called Caroline. "Do you have a minute?" I asked. "For you, always," she replied. "I think someone is going through my papers," I said. "Something important is missing." She didn't respond immediately. When she spoke, her voice carried a calm firmness. "Marcus, this is no longer small."
"You can't keep assuming it's harmless." "I don't want to jump to conclusions," I said. "Then don't jump," she answered. "Just pay attention to the ground beneath your feet. It's shifting." I thanked her, hung up, and returned to the dining table. The shoebox where I kept receipts sat nearby. I reached for it, placed a few more papers inside, and tucked the box under a chair where it wouldn't be obvious. The rest of the night crept past in uneven stretches. I attempted to read, but each sentence tangled with the same unsettled thought. How much of my life was still in my hands? Before going to bed, I locked the front door, then checked it again. Small habits form in moments of uncertainty, checking twice, listening more closely, trying to catch the world before it shifts further. In the quiet of the hallway, my reflection in the darkened window caught my eye. Not an old man losing his grip on things. Not yet. But someone standing at the edge of something he didn't fully understand. I turned off the kitchen light, replaying Vanessa's smile in my head. That smile had shape and intention. It wasn't offered. It was placed. I walked toward my bedroom, thinking of the drawers I would need to sort through in the morning, and the questions I needed to ask, without showing how much these missing pieces unsettled me. Caroline showed up just before noon, tapping lightly on my screen door the way she always did when she carried something serious. She held a folded sheet of paper in one hand, her expression tight enough to make my stomach knot before she even spoke. "I found this," she said, offering the page. "It was near the trash bins outside your son's place. Thought you should see it." The paper felt warm from the sun, but the moment I recognized my name at the top, a dull chill crept through my arms. It was a loan document, one I had never applied for, never discussed, never signed. My signature appeared at the bottom, but the strokes looked wrong, too rushed, too rounded, like someone trying to imitate my handwriting after glancing at it once. I reread the header twice, then lowered the page. "Where exactly did you find this?" I asked. "Right by the recycling cart," she replied. "Looked like someone tried to tear it but stopped halfway. I wasn't going to keep it, but when I recognized your name, Marcus, something isn't right." Her voice didn't tremble, but it carried that low certainty she saved for moments she refused to ignore. I walked to the dining table and set the paper down with an unsteady hand. The signature glared at me, mocking almost. "This isn't mine," I whispered. "I know," she said. "You never sign like that." We stood there in silence, both of us staring at the paper as though it might explain itself. My chest tightened. Things had been slipping out of place for weeks, but seeing my name attached to a loan made the ground tilt entirely. Caroline reached toward my arm, not grabbing, just steadying me with her presence. "You need to start documenting everything," she said, "and you need to protect your accounts." "I've been trying," I replied, "but I didn't think it was this." "It is," she answered, "and maybe worse." She didn't stay long. After she left, I sat at the table for several minutes, tapping my finger against the wood, trying to organize my thoughts into something manageable. The loan amount wasn't small. Whoever filed it had enough of my information to make it believable. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a moment, then returned to the page.
Someone wanted money. Someone wanted access. Someone wanted leverage. As I gathered the rest of my folders, my phone buzzed. A familiar church friend, Ms. Lorraine, had sent a message. "Just checking on you. Heard you're having memory problems. If you ever need someone to drive you to appointments, let us know." Memory problems. My jaw went slack.
Another message arrived from another friend. "Take care of yourself. I'm sorry to hear things are getting harder for you." A third message followed minutes later. "I didn't know you were struggling like that. Wish you'd said something." I pressed my palm to my forehead. The same words repeated in every message: memory, struggling, losing track. A story was spreading, and it wasn't mine. I dialed Caroline immediately. "She's telling people I'm losing my mind," I said. "She wants you isolated," Caroline replied gently. "If people doubt you, she can do whatever she wants with your information. They'll think she's helping you." Her realism cut deeper than anger would have. After we hung up, I walked through each room of my house, not because anything had changed, but because everything felt unsteady now. Every drawer I opened raised a question. Every misplaced envelope carried suspicion. I found myself checking my wallet, my safe, even the old cigar box where I kept spare keys. Near the back of a dresser, I discovered a crumpled envelope, one I didn't remember seeing before. It contained a pamphlet about assisted living programs. No note, no explanation. I stared at it until my throat tightened. My breath steadied slowly as I put the pamphlet away. I couldn't panic now. Panic was exactly what she wanted. I tried calling my son, but he didn't pick up. He rarely did these days. I left no voicemail. Speaking into a recording felt pointless when I wasn't sure he'd ever listen. At the kitchen table again, I laid out every piece of paper I still had and wrote a timeline, marking the night of the birthday party as the point where things accelerated. I included the missing documents, the changed address, the pharmacy call, and now this forged loan. A notepad filled quickly. As I turned a page, a knock sounded at the door. My pulse quickened before I reminded myself paranoia wasn't going to help. I opened it to find Mrs. Willis from next door, holding a casserole. "Thought you could use something warm," she said. "Vanessa told me you've been forgetting meals." Forgetting meals. Forgetting. The pattern became clear. "Thank you," I replied, taking the dish. She glanced over my shoulder at the papers scattered across the table. "If you need help sorting things, dear, you just ask. We all understand." I forced a nod, closing the door gently once she left. My hands tightened around the edges of the casserole pan until the heat seeped into my skin, grounding me in the moment. I set it on the counter and gripped the back of a chair. Someone wasn't just meddling. Someone was shaping a narrative, piece by piece, person by person, until it became easier for the world to believe her version of me than the real one. The loan document sat at the center of the table. That false signature seemed almost alive now. A quiet warning. I sat down again, wrote another note in my timeline, then stared out the window at the street, where neighbors walked their dogs and waved without realizing my life was being rearranged behind closed doors. The casserole dish clicked softly as it settled on the counter. I wrote one more line in the notepad, my pen pressing harder than before, the words forming before I fully realized what I intended to do next. The next morning, I gathered every folder I owned, stacking them on the dining table until the wood disappeared beneath piles of statements, receipts, pension letters, bank records, and the copy Caroline had brought me. Sorting through them felt like picking up pieces of a life someone else had tried to scatter.
I didn't rush. Each page was examined, dated, and placed in a separate envelope. The steady rhythm of the work steadied my breathing. By noon, I had enough of a trail to take downtown.
Michael Torres's office sat in an older brick building near 5 Points, tucked between a tax service and the barber shop. The elevator creaked, carrying me to the 3rd floor, where his plaque hung slightly crooked beside the door. Elder Law and Financial Integrity. I knocked, and a receptionist waved me inside with a quick smile. Michael stood from his desk when I entered. A man in his late 40s, he carried the kind of practiced calm that comes from handling other people's panic daily. "Mr. Ellington," he said, offering his hand. "Come in. What can I help you with?" I placed the envelopes on his desk one by one. "I need you to look these over," I said. "There are loans in my name I never signed, documents missing from my home. Someone changed my medical address without permission." His expression sharpened slightly. "How long has this been happening?" "A few weeks," I answered. "But I think the planning started earlier." He flipped through the first stack slowly, marking pages with yellow tabs. Several minutes passed before he spoke again. "These signatures don't match your writing," he said. "And the loan institution should have asked for in-person verification for amounts this high." He tapped a page lightly. This is sloppy forgery, not professional. Someone close enough to you to know your full information, but careless." A knot tightened in my stomach. "Is it enough to challenge legally?" "It's enough to start an inquiry," he replied. "But whoever did this won't stay still once they know you're questioning it." His tone held a weight that told me he'd seen situations like this end badly before. We went over each irregularity, every unexplained withdrawal, every line item I didn't recognize, every claim that didn't belong. Michael wrote notes with a firm hand, occasionally pausing to ask a question about dates, locations, or who might have access to my mail. "Do you live alone?" he asked. "Yes." "Who visits regularly?" "My son and his wife," I said quietly. He nodded once, not reacting, just recording the fact. An hour later, he gathered everything into a single binder. "Leave these with me. I'll run them through our verification channels. We'll know soon whether someone has been opening accounts using your identity." "What should I do in the meantime?" I asked. He folded his hands. "Document everything. Any phone call you didn't make, any letter out of place, any unexpected visitor. And don't confront anyone. Not yet. Once a person thinks their scheme is about to unravel, they tend to get bold." The comment lingered with me long after I left his office. Outside, traffic roared along Peachtree Street. People rushed past carrying coffees or talking on phones, unaware that a single forged signature could upend a man's life. I walked slowly towards the parking deck, letting the noise wash over me until my mind settled. Something inside had shifted. I no longer felt fragile or confused. A calm, colder part of me had surfaced. One my wife used to call my steel side. The part I used when work emergencies struck, when bridges flooded or equipment failed. Problems were never solved by emotion. They were solved by clarity. By the time I returned home, that steel had settled in my chest. I spent the afternoon reorganizing my files. A new notebook was opened for dates and statements. The shoebox beneath the chair now held only the most sensitive documents. I hid a flash drive inside an old coffee tin at the back of my pantry. Small steps, all deliberate. As dusk settled, I brewed a cup of tea and sat at the table reviewing the notes from earlier. The house hummed with its usual quiet. though a faint tension threaded through the calm, like a room waiting for someone to enter. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number appeared on the screen. You should stop asking questions. It won't help you. No name, no punctuation, just that one sentence. I stared at it until the steam from my tea faded. My thumb hovered over the screen before I locked the phone and set it face down. There was no need to respond. The message already told me what I needed to know. Someone was watching. Someone felt threatened. Someone believed I was close enough to the truth that they needed to warn me. I stood, walked to the front window and looked out at the street. Nothing was unusual. Cars parked neatly along the curb, porch lights flickering on up and down the block. Still, the quiet carried a different weight now. My tea had cooled by the time I returned to the table. I took a small sip, set the cup aside, and picked up the notebook again. Another line needed to be added, and I wrote it calmly, without hesitation, before turning the page to continue organizing the rest of my notes. The envelope from the courthouse lay on my porch like a quiet threat. I recognized the seal immediately. Fulton County Probate Court. My stomach tightened as I bent to pick it up. A breeze rustled the bushes along the walkway, yet everything around me felt unnaturally still. Inside the house, I set the envelope on the table and stared at it for a long moment, as if waiting for it to open itself. My hands finally moved, tearing the flap slowly. The letter slid out with a weight heavier than paper should ever carry. Petition for evaluation of mental competency. Filed by Vanessa Ellington. My breath dragged shallow. I read the lines again, then a third time, hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. They didn't. She claimed I was unable to manage personal and financial affairs, that I showed increasing confusion, that I was a potential danger to myself. Each accusation struck like a blade dipped in familiarity, pieces of the story she had been planting for weeks. A faint ringing grew in my ears. I sat, letting the chair take my weight before my legs gave out. The petition detailed remedies the court could impose: appointment of a guardian, transfer of financial authority, medical decision-making rights. If approved, everything I owned, every dollar I saved, every document proving the shape of my life, could land in her hands. My phone buzzed. Michael Torres. Marcus, did you get the notice? Yes. Listen carefully, he said, his voice firm. If the judge rules in her favor, she becomes your legal guardian. She'll have access to your accounts, your pension, even decisions about your home. You need to be evaluated by an independent psychologist, and you need to stay alert. This is a serious play. I know, I said quietly. She's trying to cut you out before we expose the fraud, he continued. If you're declared incompetent, you can't testify about identity theft. Your statements won't hold weight in court. She would essentially silence you. A cold tremor spread beneath my ribs. She wants me erased, I murmured. She wants control, he replied. And people who want control rarely stop here. After he hung up, I stood and walked to the sink, running water over my hands without thinking. The cool stream grounded me for a moment. My reflection in the window above the faucet looked older than I remembered, lines sharper, eyes weary. But beneath the exhaustion, something steady persisted. Still,
Betrayal from your own family has a unique way of unraveling the edges of a man. For years I'd carried the guilt of losing my wife, the guilt of not doing enough for my son, the guilt of aging faster than I planned. Now all those quiet fears merged into one crushing thought. Maybe she'll convince them I'm exactly what she says. The idea hollowed me out. I moved into the living room, pacing slowly. My pulse pounded at my temples.
Every sound in the house felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floor beneath my steps. When the doorbell rang, I nearly flinched. Caroline stood on the porch, holding a grocery bag.
"You look pale," she said. "What happened?" I handed her the court notice. She read each line, her expression tightening with every sentence. "She did this," Caroline whispered. "She actually did it." I sank onto the couch. The cushions dipped under me as if acknowledging defeat. Caroline sat across from me, leaning forward. "You can fight this," she said. "You have proof. You have a lawyer. And you're sharp as ever." "It's not just the judgment," I said. "It's the narrative she's building. People already think I'm slipping." Caroline set the notice aside and took a slow breath. "She's playing on fear," she said. "Fear of aging, fear of losing control. But you're not alone in this." Her reassurance helped, but only a fraction.
My mind kept circling back to the same thought. She's not doing this out of panic. She planned it. I stood and walked toward the hallway where my files were kept. The simple act of opening the closet door steadied me. The shoebox with my receipts sat exactly where I'd placed it. The binder Michael created lay beside it. I pulled the binder out and held it against my chest. The weight of it grounded me, reminding me that I wasn't imagining things. Evidence existed. Patterns existed. My sanity wasn't the question. Her intentions were. The phone buzzed again. A text message from my son. "Dad, Vanessa told me what's going on. Let her help you. Don't make this harder." The blow landed harder than the petition had. He believed her. He truly believed her. My throat tightened so sharply I had to set the phone down to breathe. Caroline approached slowly. "What did he say?" I shook my head. "He thinks she's helping me." Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "She's using him. Don't let this break you." I didn't answer. My mind drifted to a memory of teaching Daniel how to tie his shoes, his small fingers fumbling, his face scrunched in concentration. I remembered holding his bike steady as he learned to ride, running alongside him until he pedaled on his own. I remembered sitting with him on the porch after his mother died, the silence between us heavy but shared. That same boy now thought I needed to be supervised. The grief in that realization ran deeper than anger. I returned to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and held it between my palms. The tremor in my fingers unsettled me more than the text messages or the court petition. This moment, the shaking hand, the racing thoughts, the fear, it was exactly what she wanted documented. A slip, a crack, proof of decline. I set the glass down carefully. No, not like this. Michael had said people become bold when their plans are threatened. If Vanessa risked going to court, she must be afraid I was close to uncovering something larger. She wasn't lashing out blindly. She was striking before I could. A sharp thought surfaced, cutting through the panic. If she needs me silenced this urgently, she must know something is coming. Caroline stood in the doorway, watching me with quiet concern. "Marcus?" she asked. I picked up the binder again, running a hand over the cover.
I'm fine, I said, though my voice had a rough edge. I just need to think. The clock in the hallway ticked steadily as I sat back down at the table. I reopened my notebook and drew a line across the page, dividing it for the next steps. My pen hovered a moment before sliding into motion. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Somewhere down the street, a car door shut. Life continued its ordinary rhythm, while mine tilted towards something far more dangerous. I kept writing, the page gradually filling with notes and possibilities as the evening settled around me. Michael asked me to come in early, before his regular appointments. His voice on the phone carried a weight that made the drive downtown feel longer than usual. I parked behind his building and climbed the stairs, gripping the rail tighter than necessary. He met me at the door. "Come in," he said quietly. "I have something you need to see." I followed him to his office. A folder sat open on his desk, along with the laptop angled away, as if he'd been reviewing something moments before I arrived. He handed me a stack of papers first, copies of the loan applications, stamped with verification marks from the financial institutions. Each page included a signature. Each signature claimed to be mine. "These are the finalized versions," he said. "The banks confirmed they were submitted electronically, but the paperwork shows physical signatures too. Whoever did this wanted it to appear airtight." The signatures looked even sloppier now that the documents were clearer. The loops were too wide, the slant inconsistent, the pressure uneven. It was almost insulting how little effort had been made to imitate my handwriting. But the next thing he showed me changed everything. Michael turned the laptop screen toward me. "This came from an anonymous source yesterday. No explanation, no metadata. But what's on it? Well, take a look." He clicked play. The video was short, less than a minute, grainy as though recorded from a phone hidden inside a bag or pocket. Two people sat at a dining table. The first figure was unmistakably Vanessa, her voice carrying the same firm persuasion she used when she wanted something done her way. The second figure wasn't visible from the front, only their hands and part of an arm appeared. They held a pen uncertainly over a document. Vanessa leaned in, tapping the paper. "No, curve it more." "He writes slower. Try again." The person attempted the signature again. She exhaled sharply. "Too fast. You're making him look younger than he is. Keep the hesitation at the beginning. His hand shakes a little." My jaw tightened as I watched her demonstrate a shaky start, then motion for the person to mimic it. "That's closer," she said. "If anyone asks, he was tired. Elderly men get confused with paperwork all the time." The clip ended there. I sat back slowly, unable to pull my eyes from the blank screen even after the video faded. "That's her," I said. My voice came out lower than I expected. Michael nodded, and the signature samples match the forged documents. "Who sent it?" I asked. "No idea. They used a masked email. Could be someone close to her, someone who had a change of heart, or someone she underestimated." A quiet pulse of hope stirred in my chest, small, fragile, but real. Yet another part of me held back. Vanessa had a talent for bending narratives, for turning accusations into sympathy. A single video wouldn't guarantee anything. Michael seemed to anticipate the hesitation. "This isn't the only evidence," he said, pulling another sheet from the folder. "We cross-referenced the timestamps on the fraudulent loan applications with her internet activity, public social media, review postings, anything that leaves a digital trail. The timeline aligns. She had access. She had motive.
And now we have visual proof of her involvement. I took the papers and skimmed the dates. Everything lined up too cleanly to be coincidence. Michael continued. Her next move will be denial. Aggressive denial. She'll accuse you of falsifying the video or claim it's edited. People like her always attack first. But the consistency of the handwriting, the submission patterns, the financial trails, those don't lie. I drew in a slow breath and released it. She's already filed the competency petition, I said. She'll argue this video is nothing more than the delusion of a declining man. That's why we're building this case, layer by layer, he replied. When someone lies often enough, they eventually contradict their own story, and she's reached that point. We reviewed the documents for nearly an hour. Every detail now felt like a puzzle piece sliding into place. Dated transactions, strange withdrawals, and the missing pension letter that suddenly made sense. She'd needed proof I couldn't handle my finances to strengthen her petition. Removing certain documents would help her narrative. Michael walked me out when we finished. Before I left, he said something that echoed in my chest long after I stepped into the hallway. She thinks she's ahead, he said, but she's been leaving footprints everywhere. On the drive home, my mind replayed the video again and again. The certainty in her tone, the casual cruelty, the calculation. For years I had brushed off her sharper comments, her subtle digs, her tightening grip on my son's life. I told myself she was just stressed, or tired, or different from what I expected in a daughter-in-law. But seeing her teach someone to copy my signature, seeing the ease with which she discussed manipulating my age, my dignity, that pierced something deeper than her insults ever had. At a red light, my phone buzzed with another message. I glanced at it briefly. From Vanessa. I heard you've been telling people lies. It won't end well for you. There was no anger in her words, no fear, just confidence, dangerous confidence, the kind that comes from believing she still controlled the narrative. I didn't respond. I pulled into my driveway and sat inside the car for a moment. A neighbor walked by with his dog, giving me a polite wave. Nothing about the street suggested the storm quietly building beneath its surface. The ordinary rhythm of the neighborhood continued, while my world shifted beneath my feet. Inside, I set my keys down and moved to the table where my notebook waited. The binder from Michael lay beside it. I added a new section at the back, labeled Video Evidence, and wrote down the details while they were still sharp in my mind. For a moment, I let the quiet of the house settle around me. Then another thought rose, clear and undeniable. She hadn't just forged my signature. She had documented how to do it. She had created her own undoing. The point she believed was her greatest strength, the secrecy of her planning, the confidence in her hidden schemes, was the very thing that would unravel all of it. I reached for the binder again, flipping through pages until the timeline of her deception appeared in full. The pattern stood out like bold lettering. Her weakness wasn't greed. It wasn't ambition. It was arrogance, the belief that she'd hidden her tracks so perfectly no one would ever find them. My pen hovered above the next blank line. I wrote slowly, letting the words settle into place before turning the page and gathering the rest of the documents around me. The courthouse lobby buzzed with low voices, heels clicking against tile, papers shuffling in impatient hands. I moved through it, carrying the binder Michael helped me assemble. evidence stacked so neatly it felt like armor. The air inside Fulton County Probate Court always seemed colder than it needed to be, though maybe that was just the weight of what brought people here. A clerk directed me to hearing room 4B. Vanessa stood near the front, speaking with her attorney. She wore a soft, grey dress, hair pinned back, posture relaxed, an image crafted to inspire sympathy. When she noticed me, her smile tightened, but didn't falter. Not yet. "Mr. Ellington," her attorney said as I passed. "We hope today brings clarity." Vanessa added, "I just want what's best for you." I didn't respond. I took my seat beside Michael, who slid a legal pad toward me. "Stay steady," he murmured. "She'll lead with emotion. We'll answer with facts." The judge entered and everyone rose. Once seated again, the hearing began, as cold, procedural, and quietly brutal as I expected. Vanessa's attorney opened by painting a picture of an elderly man in cognitive decline, someone who struggles with basic tasks, someone who cannot manage his finances or personal safety. Each sentence chipped at the edges of my patience, but the judge remained unreadable. Then Vanessa took the stand. She folded her hands delicately and spoke in a tremble-soft voice. "I've been worried for months," she said. "He forgets conversations. He misplaces essential documents. He called me twice one night, asking where he lived." Michael leaned close and whispered, "Notice no specifics, no dates, no verification." Vanessa continued, voice cracking at practiced intervals. "I'm not doing this to hurt him. I'm trying to protect him. He's always been proud, but sometimes pride becomes dangerous." Her attorney thanked her gently and turned toward the judge. "We have a witness, Your Honor." A thin man in his 30s walked to the stand. I didn't recognize him. His suit didn't fit properly, and his eyes moved too quickly. "I'm a neighbor," he said. "I've seen Mr. Ellington talking to people who weren't there, more than once." A murmur rippled across the room. My pulse stumbled. The judge watched the man with mild curiosity. Michael stood. "Your Honor, we object. No last name, no address, no proof this individual is a neighbor, and his statement lacks any verifiable detail." The judge nodded. "Sustained. The testimony stands only as personal observation with limited evidentiary weight." But Vanessa had already achieved her goal. She laced the air with doubt. When it was our turn, Michael motioned for me to take the stand. I walked slowly, not to appear frail, but deliberate. The oath felt heavier than usual. "Mr. Ellington," the judge said, "you may respond to the allegations." I opened the binder. The simple act steadied me. "I handle my own affairs," I said, voice even. "I pay my bills, attend my appointments, and maintain my accounts. But someone has been interfering with those accounts." Vanessa's attorney rose. "Objection!" "Overruled," the judge said. "He may continue." I handed the first set of documents to the bailiff, who carried them to the bench. Loan applications, forged signatures, date stamps. "Those are not my signatures," I said. "I never applied for these loans." The judge flipped through the pages, her expression tightening. Michael stepped forward. "Your Honor, we also have verification from 2 financial institutions confirming these were submitted without Mr. Ellington's in-person authorization." The opposing attorney shifted uncomfortably. Then Michael opened the laptop. "With the court's permission," he said, "we will present supplemental evidence." The judge nodded. The video began playing.
Grainy footage, the dining table, Vanessa leaning in, coaching someone through the imitation of my signature. Her voice unmistakable, calm, certain, instructing the person to add a shaky start to mimic age. Silence filled the room, heavy as snowfall. Vanessa's face drained of colour. She stood abruptly. "That's fake," she said, voice cracking. "That video is edited. He's trying to frame me." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Mrs. Ellington." Vanessa hesitated, then lowered herself into her chair. Her attorney leaned in, whispering urgently, but she kept shaking her head, eyes flashing with panic. Michael handed up the original copy of the anonymous file, along with authenticity analysis. The judge read quietly for several moments. I watched her expression shift, not dramatic, but decisive. A subtle tightening around the eyes, a single exhale through her nose. She set the papers down. "Mrs. Ellington," she said, "your petition rests on the allegation that Mr. Ellington is mentally incompetent. However, the evidence presented today contradicts your statements and raises significant concerns about your involvement in fraudulent activity." Vanessa swallowed hard, fingers digging into the edge of the table. The judge continued, voice steady. "This court denies your request for guardianship. Furthermore, due to the nature of the evidence submitted, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into possible identity theft, forgery, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." A ripple swept through the room, some mix of surprise, discomfort, maybe justice unfolding in real time. Vanessa's eyes grew wild. "You don't understand. He's lying. He's confused." "Enough," the judge said. "This hearing is concluded." Her final gavel strike echoed through the room like a sharp breath released. I closed the binder and stood. I didn't look at Vanessa. I didn't need to. Years of fear, confusion, and humiliation drained from my shoulders in the slow, steady release. As I stepped into the hallway, the murmurs behind me blurred into background noise. The door swung shut, leaving the chaos on the other side. I kept walking, one hand brushing lightly along the binder at my side, my pace measured, steady, unhurried. The mountain road curved gently as I drove north, leaving Atlanta behind without ceremony. No rush, no fear, just a steady motion that felt almost cleansing. The cabin I'd rented in western North Carolina sat far enough from town to give me space, but close enough that I wouldn't feel stranded. I carried only 2 suitcases, a box of documents, my tools, and a coffee mug my wife once gave me. When I stepped onto the porch for the first time, the wood flexed slightly under my weight. The railing leaned outward at an odd angle, and the screen door stuck halfway open. None of that bothered me. Fixing things had always been my way of settling into unfamiliar places. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old pine and dust. I opened the windows, letting the breeze roll through. It carried the scent of damp soil and something sweet drifting from the trees. That simple inhale, quiet, steady, felt like the first breath I'd taken in months. I placed my binder on the small kitchen table, not to review it, just to acknowledge the weight it had carried and the burden it no longer placed on me. The district attorney's office kept me informed, though I answered only what was required. Vanessa faced multiple charges now: identity theft, forgery, financial exploitation. Her attorney reached out once, hoping I'd consider some kind of negotiation. I declined. There was nothing to discuss. Daniel called twice. I didn't answer the first time. The second time, he left a voicemail. "Dad, I don't know how things got this far. I didn't see it. I'm sorry." His voice cracked on the last word.
I sat with the phone in my hand a long while. The apology wasn't enough to stitch the wound shut, but it was something. Not a bridge, but a piece of driftwood floating in the middle of a river that had once been ours. I didn't call back, not because I hated him, but because the part of me that had always stepped toward him needed rest. Some relationships survive storms, others survive by keeping distance. Days in the cabin found a different rhythm. Mornings began with the kettle humming on the stove. I'd sit outside on the porch with my coffee, listening to the low hum of insects or the quiet shuffle of deer crossing somewhere near the trees. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. I repaired the railing one afternoon, taking my time with each board. The hammering echoed against the hillside, steady and familiar. Sweat gathered along my neck, and sawdust clung to my shirt. Those small signs of work, real work, reminded me of who I was, long before fear crept into my life. In the evenings, the cabin dimmed early. Mountain shadows moved quickly once the sun dipped behind the ridge. I read, cooked simple meals, or organized the last of my papers. A few of the documents still stirred a knot in my stomach, but the knot untangled more with each passing day. A letter arrived from the DA's office 2 weeks after I moved. Vanessa had lost her job at the insurance firm. The company terminated her after reviewing the court findings. Her access to financial databases had become a liability. She was now under formal investigation, and additional charges were being considered. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not to revisit, just to keep for the record. Caroline called sometimes in the early afternoon. She never asked questions about things I didn't want to answer. "How's the weather up there today?" she'd ask. "Cooler than Atlanta," I'd say. "Good. You always liked the cold." Our conversations drifted easily, never touching the past unless I chose to bring it up. Her steadiness felt like a rope tied quietly around my waist. Supportive, not restraining. One morning, while stacking firewood beside the cabin, I paused to catch my breath. The quiet around me wasn't silent. It carried the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a hawk, and the rhythmic thump of my heartbeat calming itself. I realized then something I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't waiting for anything. Not waiting for the next threat, the next accusation, the next manipulation. Not waiting to be blindsided. I was simply here. A month after the hearing, the last thread connecting me to my old life arrived in a plain envelope. It contained a formal notice. The petition had been dismissed with prejudice, and any future attempts to claim guardianship over me would require substantial new evidence. The court acknowledged the fraudulent attempts made under my name. I placed the notice next to my coffee mug, the one my wife had given me years ago. Her handwriting still faded along the rim. "Take it slow, Marcus. You always walk too fast." That afternoon, I walked the dirt path behind the cabin. Leaves crackled under my boots. The air cooled as the sun shifted behind a cloud. I stopped at a small rise overlooking the valley below. Houses dotted the hills in the distance, their lights beginning to glow in the early dusk. Smoke lifted from a few chimneys, drifting upward like threads unraveling into the sky. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't scare me. Aging didn't scare me. Even loneliness didn't scare me. What frightened me had always been the thought of losing myself, my autonomy, my dignity, my sense of where I ended and others began. But I hadn't lost myself. Not to her, not to fear, not to lies. I walked back toward the cabin as the last streaks of daylight thinned across the ridge. Inside, I set my mug on the wooden table and sank into the chair. My knees ached a little from the climb, but the ache felt honest. The kettle whistled softly. I poured another cup of coffee and wrapped my hands around the warmth. A stillness settled across the room. Gentle, steady, final in its own quiet way. I didn't need closure from anyone, didn't need apologies, didn't need to reclaim the past. All I needed was this: a life that belonged entirely to me again. Outside, the sky deepened to a muted blue. A breeze pushed through the trees, brushing against the cabin walls. I watched the steam rise from my cup, drifting upward, disappearing without fuss or sound. Then I set the mug down and let the quiet carry me into the evening.